Ron Dayney will be talking about gardening. Please welcome Ron.
Hello and welcome, fellow Toastmasters and guests. One of the most curious things about modern American life is how one word can have multiple different meanings. Such as, the word fast means something completely different to my wife and I, especially when we're on our jet ski. The word far means something completely different to a city dweller who takes Uber all the time versus somebody that lives in rural America and drives 40 miles just to get groceries. The word hot has multiple different meanings in our language. One of those words that's always puzzled me and I never quite knew the meaning of was gardening. So this perplexed me for many years. My quest to understand the meaning of gardening began when my wife and I moved from a downtown Chicago condo to a suburban home where I finally had a little patch of dirt to experiment around with. What is the meaning of gardening? Is gardening a sport? Is it a hobby? Is it a religion? I didn't know. So I began my quest at a trailhead called Home Depot. There I met a wise old trail guide who instructed me about the critical gear I would need for this endeavor. He instructed me to buy shovels, hoes, rakes, fertilizer, manure, weed killer, and the all-important seeds. So I took this potent mixture back home, and I used the hoe, and I used the shovel, and to prepare the ground. And I worked very hard. It wound up being a very strenuous exercise because I had chosen a barren, hardened spot of ground behind the garage that was full of weeds. And I was constantly out there hoeing and shoveling and raking. Such a strenuous exercise. At that point I thought gardening must be a rigorous sport. So I continued on in my journey to gardening, and I prepared the ground. I continued preparing it with the hoe and rake and shovel. Finally, it was ready, and I planted 2 rows of seeds in there. I planted corn, I planted tomatoes, and I planted carrots in full sunlight. Because when you drive through the states of Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, you see corn 6 feet tall in full sunlight. That was going to be just like my corn. So after I planted the rows of seeds, I watered, and I waited, and I waited, and I watered. At this point into my excursion into gardening, I realized that gardening was not only a rigorous sport, it was a way of life. So I waited some more and watered some more. I waited all summer long. Nothing came up, not even the weeds. I was devastated. What had I done wrong? Was my potent mixture of fertilizer and manure not potent enough? Were my seeds defective? Was it improper use of hoe and shovel? I was very perplexed. Fortunately, that autumn, my wife and I brought home a brand new baby girl into our house. This changed me. I had a new sport. It was called burping and diapers and bottles and rocking. It was a new way of life called parenting. Well, life moved on, and we moved to Henderson, Nevada. But we brought with us our Midwestern values of playing with the dirt and hard work. In our house in Henderson, we had the desert right behind us. And so the family and I, we would go on long walks out in the desert, and with our Midwestern values of interacting with the earth, we were constantly picking up very interesting and beautiful rocks and gems and minerals. We went on hundreds of hikes back in those days, and every time we would bring back dozens of rocks and minerals, sometimes even gems like crystals. After 4 years of this, and the strenuous labor it took to bring back 20, 30 pounds of extra rocks every hike. We would put those rocks in one little corner in our backyard, and that corner kept growing and growing and growing. And eventually I looked at it one day and I realized, hey, I have a garden. It's a rock garden. It has all the basic elements of garden. It's in the dirt. It took a lot of work to do, and we interacted with the earth to create it. All I needed to do was shift my attitude about gardening. A garden need not always produce corn, tomatoes, and carrots. It could produce joy instead. After all, isn't joy just as important as vegetables? So, after a lifetime of searching for the meaning of gardening, I realized that I already had it, and gardening wasn't a sport or a hobby or a way of life. Gardening is a philosophy. Like 95% of life, gardening is all in our attitude. So if I look at my thousands of rocks and minerals and see a garden, then that is what it is. Thank you.